What happens when love feels like fate but unravels like a lie? This is My Summer of Love, a story of passion, obsession, and deception. As two young women form an intense connection, secrets and betrayals threaten to tear them apart. Stay tuned for a gripping recap of this mesmerizing film. Mona's lying on a hill with a beat-up, engineless Honda bike when she meets Tamsin. And let's be real, these two couldn't be more different. Mona's life is rough around the edges. She lives above a pub that doesn't even feel like a pub anymore, thanks to her brother's weird religious obsession. Tamsin? She's all polished and mysterious, the kind of girl who probably reads poetry for fun. When they first talk, you can already tell something's about to happen, something big. At first, Mona is just curious. Tamsin has this way of talking that makes everything sound important. She's been suspended from her fancy boarding school for being a bad influence. And honestly, that only makes her more intriguing. Mona doesn't say yes to Tamsin's invitation right away, but you can tell she's already thinking about coming back. Who wouldn't? When your life is full of church sermons and your brother talking about saving the valley in Jesus' name, a girl like Tamsin is basically a breath of fresh air. Back at home, things are weird. Mona's brother Phil wasn't always like this. He used to be a regular guy, but ever since he got out of prison, he's been born again. And when I say born again, I mean really born again. He's turned their pub into a full-on spiritual center. No beer, no laughter, just prayers, sermons, and a bunch of people waving their hands and chanting. He talks about reclaiming the valley for the Lord, like it's some kind of holy mission. Mona's not buying it, though. She watches from the sidelines, rolling her eyes at the whole thing. Mona's tired. Tired of the prayers, tired of the pub, tired of everything being so serious. That's probably why she finds herself walking back to Tamsin's fancy house. And when she gets there, it's like stepping into a completely different world. Tamsin doesn't just sit around watching TV. Oh no. She plays the cello. She listens to classical music like it's no big deal. And the way she talks? She drops words like Nietzsche as if everyone should know who that is. Mona doesn't have a clue, but she's hooked. They start talking about their families and things get real fast. Mona's story is rough. Her mom died of cancer and she doesn't even know her dad. It's just her, Phil, and his religious friends. Tamsin's story, though. It's tragic in a whole different way. Her sister, Sadie, died of anorexia. And when Tamsin points to a picture of her, Mona can't help but admit, Sadie was beautiful. There's this sadness in Tamsin's voice when she talks about her, but there's also something else, like she finds beauty in the pain. And then Tamsin drops this wild idea. She talks about Nietzsche, this philosopher who believed that some people are just meant to succeed. Like, certain people are born to be extraordinary, while everyone else is just there. From that moment on, things start to shift. Mona isn't just curious about Tamsin, she's drawn to her. And Tamsin, she's pulling Mona into her world, little by little. Something's happening between them, and neither of them is trying to stop it. So, Mona and Tamsin are spending more and more time together, and their world is starting to feel like it only belongs to them. They talk about things Mona has never even thought about before. Big, deep ideas about life and love and what it means to be important. Tamsin tells Mona about a famous guy named Nietzsche who said that some people are born to be great and others just exist. She says people like Shakespeare and Wagner were special because they didn't care about anyone but themselves. And she compares Mona's brother, Phil, to the people Nietzsche would have hated. People who cling to religion and rules instead of living for themselves. Meanwhile, Phil is getting even deeper into his religious beliefs. He's leading these gatherings at the pub, where people pray loudly and cry and talk about cleansing their souls. Mona thinks it's all a bit much, but she watches anyway. She sees how Phil isn't the same brother she used to have. She misses the old him, the one who made her laugh and felt like home. Now all he does is talk about God. She doesn't understand why he's changed so much, and when she tells him she wants her real brother back, Phil just tells her that this is who he is now. Tamsin takes her to see something shocking, her father's secret life. She points to a house with a fancy car parked outside and says her dad is in there right now with another woman. Not her mother, but his secretary. She talks about it like it's a joke, but there's something sharp underneath her words, like she's daring herself to be okay with it. She describes the woman in cruel detail, calling her dumb and ugly and worthless. Mona doesn't know what to say. She just listens as Tamsin talks, realizing that maybe Tamsin's life isn't as perfect as it looks. Then, Tamsin plays some music for Mona. She tells her about a singer named Edith Piaf, a woman with a tragic life who lost every man she loved. But instead of being sad, Edith Piaf became famous for it. She made her suffering into something beautiful. Tamsin says that's the way life should be. If something terrible happens, you should turn it into something dramatic and wonderful. Mona isn't sure if she agrees, but she doesn't argue. Tamsin takes Mona through her giant house, showing her room after room. Each space feels cold and empty, like no one really lives there. Then they come to one door that Tamsin won't open. It's Sadie's room, her sister's. It hasn't been touched since she died. Tamsin's mother made sure of that. It's a shrine now, frozen in time. And just like that, the playful mood is gone. There's something sad and heavy in the air, and Mona doesn't know what to do with it. That night, Tamsin insists Mona stay with her. She tells her not to be scared if she hears noises. The house is old and it creaks a lot. Mona doesn't feel scared though. She feels safe with Tamsin. Maybe safer than she's felt in a long time. The next morning, Tamsin wakes her up with breakfast. She's brought Mona everything: tea, juice, toast, fruit, eggs. It's a little over the top, but that's just Tamsin's way. They joke about their plans for the day. Tamsin lists silly things like getting a full-body wax and walking the dog. And Mona surprises her by saying she's going to buy her an engine for her broken bike. Later, they go to a place Mona loves, a quiet spot on the hill, surrounded by trees and rock formations. She says it feels like a cathedral, but a natural one, not one filled with prayers and religion. Sitting there with Tamsin, she feels different. Like maybe this town, the one she's always wanted to escape from, isn't so bad after all. Tamsin starts giving Mona some of her clothes, picking out a dress for her to try on. It's Sadie's dress, but Tamsin doesn't seem to care. She tells Mona she's beautiful. Mona doesn't know what to say. No one's ever said that to her before, not like that. Then, out of nowhere, Tamsin opens up about her sister. She says watching Sadie waste away felt like watching a monster take over her body. Her bones started sticking out, her face changed, and no one could stop it. Tamsin says she felt helpless, useless. There was nothing she could do to save her. For a moment, everything is quiet. The air feels thick between them. And Mona realizes something. She's never met anyone like Tamsin before. Someone who makes sadness sound like poetry. Someone who makes life feel bigger, like it's more than just work and church and waiting for things to happen. And just like that, their world grows smaller. It's just the two of them now, lost in something neither of them fully understands yet. The sky was a dull shade of grey, the kind that made everything feel a little heavier, a little colder. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the trees. The whole town seemed quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then a knock on the door. Mona didn't move. She didn't need to. She already knew who it was. Her brother. He had a way of always finding her, always knowing where she was. But this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to see him. But her friend, she was different. She liked to talk. She started telling Mona about a man she used to see, a man who wasn't like the boys at school. He was older, stronger. He had a car. He would take her places, sing to her, make her feel special. Mona listened carefully, tilting her head as she imagined this mysterious man. But then, as her friend continued, something felt off. The way she spoke about him, the way her voice changed, like she was remembering something she didn't want to. And then the truth came out. He had left her. Just like that. One day he decided he didn't want to be with her anymore. Her friend laughed bitterly, but there was no real happiness in it. She called the man a tough guy, but Mona wasn't so sure. If he was really so tough, why did he leave? Why did he run away instead of facing what he had done? Mona didn't say anything, but she could feel something bubbling up inside her. Anger, maybe, or just frustration at how unfair the world was. Then they had an idea, a dangerous idea. They would go see the man's wife. It sounded crazy, but in that moment, it made perfect sense. If he thought he could just walk away, pretend nothing had happened, they would make sure he couldn't. So they went. The house was small, with peeling paint and an old wooden fence that had seen better days. When the woman answered the door, she looked tired, worn down, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Mona's friend didn't waste time. She told her everything, every single thing. How the man had tricked her, how he had left her to deal with the consequences on her own, how she had been forced to make a choice no one should have to make. The woman's face changed. At first she looked shocked, then angry, then something else, something even worse. She looked hurt. Mona almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the woman snapped. She shouted at them, telling them to leave, that they had no right to come here, to mess with her family. Mona's friend stood her ground for as long as she could, but in the end they had no choice. They turned and walked away, leaving the woman standing in the doorway. The next day, the town gathered. There was something big happening, something important. A man stood at the center of it all, a giant wooden cross behind him. He spoke with a kind of energy that sent shivers down Mona's spine. He talked about salvation, about the darkness in the valley, about how he had been chosen to bring the light back. People listened. They believed him. Mona didn't know what to think. She looked at the cross, at the way the crowd moved as one, their voices rising in song. It was beautiful, in a strange way, like something out of a dream. Her friend leaned in, whispering that the man up front didn't have a girlfriend. "He's married to God," she said with a smirk. Mona rolled her eyes. As the ceremony continued, the man raised his arms, shouting that anyone could be saved. Anyone! Mona wondered if that was true. Could her friend be saved? Could she? The cross was lifted higher, towering over them all. The crowd held their breath, waiting. The man on stage smiled, his face full of something Mona couldn't quite understand. He whispered something to himself, a prayer maybe. And then the cross was planted into the ground, standing tall against the sky. The people cheered, but Mona, she just felt tired. She didn't know what she believed. She didn't know if any of this mattered. All she knew was that somewhere out there, Ricky was still living his life, pretending nothing had ever happened. And that wasn't fair. Not at all. Tam shivered in the morning air, rubbing her arms as she stared at Mona. The night had been cold, and the ground beneath them had been hard and damp. Her skin itched from the bites of tiny insects, and her stomach growled angrily. Mona had found some blackcurrants, stuffing them into her pockets like they were treasures, but Tam knew they wouldn't be enough. She felt tired, cold, and sick of everything. Mona, ever the dreamer, was still clinging to adventure. She liked the idea of being out in the wild, surviving off the land, away from the world they had left behind. But Tam had reached her limit. She wanted a warm bed, proper food, and to feel safe again. She told Mona that she just wanted to go home. Mona hesitated, then nodded. She was cold too, and deep down, she knew they couldn't keep living like this forever. As they walked, Tam thought about all the strange things that had happened. The prayer, the darkness, the talk of the devil. It unsettled her. The idea that there could be something lurking in the valley, something beyond their understanding, made her skin crawl. And the board, the way it moved on its own, spelling out Sadie. That had shaken her the most. Sadie. The name lingered in her head like an echo. The others had played it off like a joke, but Tam had felt something real in that moment, like someone unseen had been reaching out to them, desperate and sad. Someone who blamed their father. The world felt different after that. It was like a curtain had been lifted, and she could see things she hadn't noticed before. The wind whispering through the trees felt like voices murmuring. Shadows stretched in ways that didn't feel right. Even Mona seemed different, quieter, like she was lost in her own thoughts. Mona had always been good at making Tam feel safe, but now even she seemed unsettled. They passed through a clearing where the trees thinned out, and in the distance they saw a small building, half hidden behind overgrown grass. It looked abandoned, the paint peeling, the windows dark and empty. Something about it sent a chill down Tam's spine. Mona glanced at her, her face unreadable. "Luxor," Mona said suddenly, her voice distant. "It's in Egypt." Tam frowned. "What?" Mona shrugged. "Just thinking about places far away." Then she mumbled another name. Omsk. Tam didn't know where that was, but the way Mona said it made it sound like a far-off dream. Maybe she was trying to distract herself, thinking about places so far from here that none of this, the ghosts, the prayers, the darkness, could touch her. A rustling in the bushes made them both stop. Tam's heart pounded. She clutched Mona's arm, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then a shape stepped forward. It was a man. Not just any man, Mona's brother. Tam felt Mona tense beside her. He stood there, calm and collected, like he had been waiting for them. He was tall, with piercing eyes, and there was something about him that made Tam nervous. He wasn't threatening, not exactly, but he carried himself with a kind of quiet authority. Mona didn't say anything, just crossed her arms. Her brother didn't seem surprised to see them. He asked if Mona was there, though he clearly already knew the answer. When Tam said she'd be back soon, he nodded and said he'd wait. There was something strange about his patience, like he wasn't just waiting for Mona, but for something else entirely. Then he turned to Tam. He told her he wanted to talk. Tam hadn't expected that. She had always seen Mona's brother as distant, someone who belonged to another world, a world of church and faith, of things she didn't understand. But now he was speaking to her, his voice calm, measured, serious. He told her that he used to struggle with believing in anything, that, like her, he had doubts. But then something had changed. He started talking about the hill, about the speech he had given, the words that had come from his mouth. Tam remembered that moment. She had believed him too, even if she hadn't wanted to admit it. Something about the way he spoke had made her want to listen. And now he was telling her that it hadn't been him speaking, that it had been God. Tam swallowed. He said that there was darkness in the world, real darkness, and he knew it because he had once been filled with it. He had done terrible things, been a terrible person. He had hurt people. And it wasn't just him, it was the devil. The devil had taken hold of him, twisted him, made him into something he wasn't supposed to be. Tam didn't know what to say to that. The idea that something could control a person like that. He told her that he had found a way out, that he had asked Jesus Christ to come into his life, to fill the space where the darkness had been. And it had worked. He wasn't that person anymore. Tam wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that people could change, that darkness could be erased. But there was something in the way he spoke, something almost too sure, too unwavering, like he had decided what was true and left no room for doubt. She thought about Sadie, about the name on the board, about how the air had felt thick and heavy in that moment. If Mona's brother was right, and there was real darkness in the world, then what had they felt that night? Was it the devil, or was it something else? Tam shivered again, but this time it wasn't from the cold. Mona's brother was still looking at her, waiting. Tam didn't know what she believed, but she knew one thing: something was out there. And it was watching them. The air in the room felt heavy, like something invisible was pressing down on everything. Mona stood there, her heart pounding, listening to the words being spoken about God, about feeling him, about letting him into her heart. But she didn't feel anything, nothing at all, just emptiness. She wanted to believe, she really did. But no matter how hard she tried, it was like she was standing outside a locked door, knocking, waiting for someone to let her in. And no one ever did. The people around her were praying, their voices rising and falling, calling out to the Lord, asking for help, for guidance. Their eyes were closed, their hands raised. They truly believed. But Mona wasn't sure she ever could. She wanted to feel something, anything, but instead she just felt lost. Then suddenly there was a shift. A voice that wasn't gentle anymore, wasn't kind. It was filled with anger, accusation. Tam, her brother, had been watching her closely, and now he was furious. He called her out, said she was being tricked, that everything happening was a lie. The air grew tense. Tam's voice cut through the room like a blade, and before Mona could react, he was pushing past her, storming away. Mona chased after him, calling his name, but he wouldn't listen. He turned to her, his eyes dark and full of something she didn't understand. He was angry, but beneath that there was something else, something scared. He told her to stay away from the girl, the one who had made her feel things she had never felt before. He said she was dangerous, that there was something inside her, something dark. But Mona didn't believe that. How could love be dangerous? How could the one person who made her feel alive be the one she was supposed to stay away from? She shook her head. She wasn't going to listen. She had made her choice. She and her love were going to run away together. Leave all of this behind. They would never come back. But then, just like that, everything started falling apart. Phil, her brother, locked her inside. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in her ears. She banged on it, calling out his name, pleading with him to let her go, but there was no answer, just silence. Outside, the prayers continued, voices rising once more, asking God to reach into Mona's heart, to save her, to free her from whatever confusion had taken hold of her. But Mona didn't want to be saved. She didn't want to be freed. She just wanted to live. Anger boiled inside her. She couldn't stay here. She wouldn't. She had to find a way out. She slammed her fists against the door again and again, but it wouldn't budge. Tears stung her eyes. Then suddenly the voices outside stopped. Mona didn't know what had happened, but she felt it. Something had changed. And then, just like that, the door was open. She didn't know how. She didn't care. She ran. She ran until she was outside, the night air sharp against her skin. She found her love waiting for her. But something was wrong. The moment their eyes met, Mona knew. There was no escape. Not really. The words hit her like a slap. Her love was leaving, going back to school, going back to the life she had before. It had all been pretend, a game, a fantasy. Mona couldn't breathe. Everything they had shared, everything Mona had felt, it had all been a lie. She tried to understand, tried to make sense of the words being spoken to her. But nothing made sense anymore. She had believed, she had trusted, she had given everything, and now she was alone. Mona's hands clenched into fists. Anger and heartbreak swirled together inside her, too big, too powerful. And then, suddenly, there was a crash, a struggle. Everything spiraled out of control. The world blurred around her, the night closing in, and Mona realized, maybe it had always been like this. Maybe she had always been running towards something that was never real. Maybe she had been lost all along. My summer of love closes not with a bang, but a quiet unraveling. Mona's summer of passion and rebellion crumbles like the dust off Phil's fallen cross. Tamsin, the enigmatic rich girl who spun tragedy into poetry, packs her lies into Sadie's old suitcase and vanishes. Back to boarding school, back to a life Mona was never part of. There's no fiery confrontation, no last-minute chase. Just a cold dismissal dressed in a smirk. Sadie was poetic license. I'm a fantasist. You knew that. The romance Mona thought was transcendent, a performance. Tamsin's tears over her sister, a script. Even the Ouija board's eerie message, Sadie blames Dad, was just another prop in Tamsin's theatre of pain. Phil's grand mission to save the valley collapses as literally as his cross. He kneels in the dirt, sobbing, a born-again zealot reduced to a broken man. Mona watches it all, the prayers, the hypocrisy, the girl who made her feel extraordinary, and realizes she's alone again. But this time, it's different. The pub's stale beer and Phil's sermons no longer suffocate her. She's tasted freedom, even if it was built on lies. The film leaves Mona on the hill where it all began, Honda bike rusting beside her. The valley hums with cicadas, indifferent to her heartbreak. There's no lesson here, no redemption, just the ache of a summer that burned too bright and left ash in its wake. Tamsin becomes a ghost, Phil a cautionary tale, and Mona? She's just a girl again, but sharper at the edges, wiser to the cost of believing in fairy tales. That's our recap for today. How did you like this one? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you again here on Sapphic Nook.